Hello and welcome everyone who has joined us today on behalf of the member organizations of the Global Alliance Cities for Children and on behalf of Save the Children. My name is Stephanie Nicol. I'm the Program Officer for Urban at Save the Children and part of the Secretariat of the Global Alliance Cities for Children. The Global Alliance is made up of 27 member organizations who are collaborating to champion the rights, health and well-being of young people growing up in urban context. And the Alliance is managed and led by Save the Children's Global Urban Hub. To find out more about the Global Alliance Cities for Children, we invite you to visit our website that you can see on the screen. If you would like to stay updated about our work, our publications, events, blogs, and upcoming calls, we're also active on social media and we send out a quarterly newsletter, which you can subscribe to on our website. A couple of things that you can find on our website which might be useful to your work is the Knowledge Hub, which hosts, firstly, the Alliance's research series, Cities for Children and Youth. We have 7 publications that you can see on the screen. 6 of them are research to action briefs that summarize the literature about subject and evidence-based action. And the orange one you see on the screen is our publication, Cities for and with Children and Youth, Ideas to Inspire Action, which is a collection of 8 guides. Also in the Knowledge Hub, just further down the page, you can also find a whole range of resources relevant to the topic of cities, children, and young people. And this is a central repository that can direct you to a range of useful material. The second thing I would like to let you know that we have on our website is our blog, which is a range of shorter content about a lot of different topics, ranging from nature and cities to urban planning, slum upgrading, air pollution, road safety, and interviews with experts in the field and much more. So the climate crisis is quickly becoming one of the biggest threats to child rights globally and is deepening already pre-existing inequalities. Urban poor families are struggling to cope with climate change-induced impacts such as increasing heat, air pollution, depleting water resources, and the more and more frequent climate-induced disasters such as floods, storms, and landslides that add to the stresses that they already face. So in this webinar, we aim to raise awareness on the many ways in which children, cities, and climate intersect. And for this, I will first hand over the microphone to today's moderator, Robert Hughes, who is a clinical research fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where he's also principal investigators of children, cities, and climate in the field, and field researcher director of the Nairobi Early Childcare in Slums study. Robert has worked as a consultant to the Clean Air Fund, the Conrad Hilton Foundation, the WHO, and the UK Department for International Development. He's also worked as a senior fellow for the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, leading the development of the early childhood development strategy and programming. We will then also hear about inspiring examples of programs from Bangladesh and Kenya that have supported local urban communities, children, youth, and their families to mitigate and adapt to climate change effects. So we're honored to be joined by inspiring change makers from Bangladesh and Kenya, Elizabeth and Mamoon, who will tell us about their work. Over to you, Robert.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I will just get my screen share going. Hopefully that's working. Is that working? Shout if not. Good, I can see a thumbs up. I want to just, before I start talking, I wanted to just remind everybody the title of this webinar is Dialogues for Action. It's not dialogues for dialogues, it's not dialogues for getting depressed, it's dialogues for action. So I want to hope by the end of this, we can all leave with something we're going to do. So that might be just as simple as talking to a friend or colleague or family member about some of these issues, or maybe maybe you'll be able to emulate some of the really interesting examples that we'll talk about today. My aim is to not talk too much. I want to just set a little bit of context and to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine with others on this area, because we see it as really one of the top priorities looking forward. That said, the Cities for Children Alliance have asked that I try and help set a little bit of context. So I will try and do that, but I'll only do it for about 8 to 10 minutes. The first thing to say is that I think the core theme on this is inequality. So as I'm talking, that will be the thing I'll try and keep coming back to. And it's different versions of inequality, but as I say, we'll pick that up as we go along. So yeah, this is sort of, I was trying to think how to sort of capture it, but what we're really facing is a set of kind of what we want to talk about today is young, urban, hotter futures. And there's different ways what that means, and different ways that manifests, and different mechanisms through which that is going to happen, or is happening already. We'll talk a bit about those quickly. Firstly, let's just take a look at where we are. So we are, as a species, increasingly urban. So since about 2005, more of us have lived in urban areas than rural areas. And that trend, as you can see from these data, it's just going one way. And it's also really worth reflecting that we're urban, but we're not urban in necessarily a very organized, structured kind of standard city way, or sort of the city that's in the background of our little Zoom background here. And there's a lot of different varieties of urban. This is a fairly extreme example. This is a photo I took when we were doing some of our work recently in Nairobi, but it sort of starts to illustrate some of the vulnerabilities and some of the ways that people living in cities, and particularly informal settlements, are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Secondly, we're young. As a species, we are half the world's population is under 30. In many countries, it's much greater proportion than that, under 30. Somewhere like Kenya, the median age is around 19. Really, we're a young population. And thirdly, we're in trouble. We've got it's a mixed picture a little bit. We've got some good progress. We know there's high levels of ambition around climate. We've got the Paris Agreement, we've got the Glasgow Climate Pact, but we are significantly off track on that, and particularly off track around actually translating high level commitment into action on the ground. And that's the reason I wanted to say that, is that I think our speakers today will really exemplify some of the ways that we can start doing that, with a particular focus on children and young people, and not just children and young people as subjects, but still children and young people as people to collaborate with. So yeah, we're in trouble. I'm sure many of you have seen these, Ed Hawkins' sort of visualization of the drift from left to right here, in terms of the temperatures are already rising, and we have a significant amount of global warming already locked in. Where we go from here really depends on our action to date. This is the really critical point I wanted to make, is that the effects of climate change and the impact of climate change are not even and are not proportionately felt. So this is a map of looking at climate impact mapped across the world, and it's pretty obvious to see that there's a much higher proportion of climate impacts estimated to occur in the places that have had the least to do with causing the problem. So coming back to that point around equity, there is a geographical and geopolitical inequity in that those who have caused climate change the most are suffering the least, and those who have caused it the least are likely to suffer the most. And we need to keep that in mind as we're working on that. And I haven't forgotten about children. We'll come to that in a second. This is why I wanted to refer you to this really, really good report that Save the Children put together. And I think that to me, and for motivating some of our work, this idea that we've got to actually recognize the intergenerational equity as well. So we talk about geographical inequity, but there's an intergenerational equity too. There's some sort of fairly frightening analysis in these reports. They're complicated analyses, and I'm not going to explain the methods because it's not my research, but I wanted to draw your attention to some of this work. The headline being here that children born in 2020 are significantly, and sometimes very large, very, very many times higher, likely to experience events, particularly things like heat waves, but also floods, droughts, crop failures, and wildfires. Now, these are complicated science to actually connect planetary health system modeling and the risk of events. But I think it's a fairly consensus opinion that these things are much more likely, particularly the more direct things like heat waves. And it really does remind us that there's a big change going on. A second aspect to inequity is just to think about different groups within that. So I want us to, as we're hearing from our speakers, think about particular vulnerabilities. We've talked a little bit about urban areas and particularly urban informal settlements, but also children themselves, young people, and particularly children with disabilities are particularly vulnerable in times of any time of crisis. And there are particular vulnerabilities to do with things like heat waves. I'm going to give you a very brief a sort of highlights of some of the work we're doing, not in any detail, but I just wanted to make you aware because we're always looking for collaborators and supporters. But I coordinate a project called the Children's Cities and Climate Action Lab, working alongside groups called Y Labs, who work with urban co-design, with youth co-design, C4 Cities, and Urban Better. And the point I wanted to use to this is that to take us back a little bit. So it's, as I said, it's dialogue for action, not dialogue for depression. One of the things that I think is a really important thing we've identified from this work is that there are dreams, not nightmares, to talk about here. We can think about negative changes, and those are there. We know, for example, that nearly all young children in the world are breathing air that is WHO would define as unsafe. So 98% of young children are breathing, not breathing what WHO defines as clean air. That said, if we flip that narrative around and we say, well, look, what happens if we address that problem? If we reduce the combustion of fossil fuels, the burning of waste, the construction and associated emissions in our cities, what we've been trying to do is to map out those mechanisms where we say, well, actually, what happens if you do that is you reduce ambient air pollution, you reduce the indoor air pollution, and then that can then be tracked through to a whole set of really significant drivers of child health and development outcomes. So just to give one example, we've done some work with my colleague James Milner and colleagues where we've looked across 16 cities and we said, what would happen if we approximately got towards something that looks a little bit like net zero? So if we stopped burning things in our cities as much as we can. And really just across those 16 cities, we estimated that we would be saved, you're talking about significant numbers. So 20,000 cases of asthma, more than 40,000 babies born prematurely, and more than 20,000 babies born at low birth weight. And that's just 16 cities, and it's per year. So really some quite significant effects. So there's a positive narrative we can have here. We can flip these harms of driven by climate towards negative, positive too. The second thing that we've done in our work, and we're trying to do much more of, and we're really deepening this, is collaboration with young people and trying to capture the young people's own lived experiences. And I'm not going to talk too much because I think our speakers will talk much more about this. The only thing I would just add, and to sort of preempt that conversation, is that the lessons we're getting from young people are that we need to be ambitious, we need to think big, we need to act fast, but we also need to act together and engage with young people very meaningfully. And within that, keep a strong focus on inequalities, and also really kind of get out more and actually get out and collaborate with young people and policymakers as well. I'm going to leave it there because I want to make sure we have enough time for discussions, but I won't read all these thank yous out. But the only one I would want to just mention is that I want to thank the young people who've taken part in our research and who are collaborating with us in our youth advisory group. So without any further ado, I'm going to just stop my screen share. Can't multitask. I want to just introduce our first speaker, Mamin Rashid, who's going to give us some really talk us through the work that he is doing in Bangladesh. So he's a senior manager at I can't even pronounce it, Badabon Sangho. I'm probably doing a terrible job of pronouncing it, but it's an NGO working for women and girls' rights in the southwest region of Bangladesh. He's got first-hand experience of working with climate vulnerable and displaced communities, particularly protecting their livelihoods and access to public planning and natural resources. He's worked a number of social mobilization tools and methods that promote vulnerable communities' participation in urban planning, and in the light of thinking through challenges of building urban resilience to climate. This includes working in formal settlements, engaging climate-displaced slum dwellers and coastal towns. He's going to talk to us today about youth-led climate resilience urban planning from his on-the-ground perspective. And I would encourage you all, please do feel free to put questions into the meeting chat as we go. I'll try and keep an eye on them. We're going to go through both of we're going to hear from both of our speakers, and then we'll have a bit more of an informal roundtable where we will try to bring in as many of those questions as we can. So over to you, Mamin. Thank you.
So thank you, Robert, for giving me my introduction to all of us. And this is my pleasure to present our experience within such a webinar. Before starting my presentation sharing, I like to say something about our organization. So Badabun Sangho is a very local organization in Bangladesh, and we are very community-based organization and women rights organization. So most of our works are based on group-based approach, and we are working for the women and girls' rights. And this project was implemented in 2021 and 2022 in the coastal areas, in two towns in the coastal areas based on the climate change issues.
And could you just share your screen? Oh, great, good, it's coming, thanks.
You may know that there's climate-induced, one of the climate-induced effect is in our country is salinity, and salinity inclusion in the water and soil. Both and water, soil is hugely affected by the salinity, and as a result, the livelihood options, fishing, agriculture, cropping, all of the livelihood option is frequently damaging. And people are moving from the villages to the towns, that means cities. And the coastal cities, we worked in 2 cities at the coastal area of Bay of Bengal. And we found that each and every year, each and every season, the new people are migrating from the village and taking shelter in the informal settlement areas. When they settle in the informal slum in the town, they found that there are different kind of experience, like they don't have any kind of separate bathroom, they don't have any kind of exit way, they don't have children playground, the air pollution, those are the disaster prone area, they don't have water points, sanitation, dustbin. So lots of different experiences they are experiencing, and they don't have any understanding about the city authority and about the city budgeting and planning process. So engaging with these people, we started to work with these cities, new migrated families. So we formed the youth groups, and youth groups including the girls and boys in the communities. And the youth group trained on the GeoODK data collection. And GeoODK data collection, basically the process, by process, they are collecting the household information. At the same time, they are collecting the information of the geospatial data. So geospatial data means the road, communication, household information, exit way, dustbin, water point. Those points are located by the GIS ODK. So it is not easy to engage the community and newly migrated people within the data collection process. So we going through the series of discussions, series of social mobilization tools that include the dialogue, that includes the formation of women group. We facilitated number of coordinated sessions with the groups, and then we collected the data. And when we collected the data, we found that there are the needs and constant of the girls and children are mostly avoided by the city's authorities in their planning. Like they don't have any kind of plan for slum, about the playground, about the separate bathroom, about the safe space, about the exit point. So the youth group and the local civil society started to dialogue with the city's authority to include those kind of needs and constant within their planning level. So you found that there are some photos, the girls are collecting data by using the GIS ODK. So finally, the city authority, we developed the map, GIS map. What you find, and we showed that map within the billboard at the slum area, so that the slum people and city authority can understand clearly the future planning of the slum and the local needs and constraints of the slum people. And through the lots of dialogue and this planning level, and being a local organization, Padabon Shangho has a local presence in the community. Our board members, teams, volunteers, all are from the community. So we have a long-term follow-up with the cities, how they can include those kind of planning and needs within their budgeting and within their annual development plan. So that was our experience in the community. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Amin. Absolutely fascinating. And it's a really interesting kind of combination of collecting those insights, but also making sure those insights are communicated effectively and reach the people who need to. So I would encourage everybody, just a reminder, please do keep putting your questions in the chat. And without further ado, but hold those questions because we're going to come back to them. I want to introduce Elizabeth Wambui. So Elizabeth herself is a youth representative currently working in Kenya for Hope Raisers, which is an initiative and she's working as an environmental program coordinator. Today, she's going to talk to us about the Future Yetu project, which is an initiative to amplify the voices of residents of Korogocho, the fourth biggest informal settlement in Nairobi. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you for that introduction. So as you have heard, we work in informal settlement called Korogocho in Nairobi. And one of the main challenge is that there is disconnect between the government and the community, because the government does not acknowledge this informal settlement, because it will be forced to give services to the people. Thus, Future Yetu project is a flagship project by Hope Raisers to try and connect and create dialogue between the community and the local government, so that they can act on climate change. So I would love to take you through the project, and hopefully you'll be able to learn one or two things from our experience. So I'll share my screen. I hope you can see my screen. Can you be able to see my screen?
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay, our project is called Future Yetu. Yetu is a Swahili word meaning our, so basically it's all about our future, and it was we uses a creative methodology, that is digital storytelling, to create the dialogue between the community and also enable the community to share the stories within themselves and create awareness on issues of climate change. So the project have 4 processes, so 4 parts. So part 1 is basically the baseline survey to understand the community perception towards climate change and also help the community to adapt to climate change, to define the climate change, what is climate change to them. The part 2 is now the digital storytelling workshop, which aims to engage the community and build the capacity of local leaders to be able to articulate and express their views on climate change and adaptation. Digital storytelling, first of all, is a normal storytelling, but it have digital form, such as images, audio, and videos. It is very short, like 2 minutes, just highlighting the experiences of people. And another important aspect of a digital story is the participants have to write and produce their own stories. That being said, it means that our participants have to be trained to have those particular skills so that they can be able to create their own stories. And this is where now the youth come in. So young people help to train during this workshop because they are very conversant with digital skills, and they help in video editing, shooting, taking photographs that are used in the stories, which one of the lessons that we have actually learned is that it is important to involve youth, or us as youth to be involved as not just as participants, but also as leaders, because it increases the participation of youth and also help youth to feel important as they take forefront of taking charges of or controlling the challenges that are happening in our community. Just to note also, the elder generation also in the process also are very good in storytelling. That means that they also train in storytelling, and during this workshop there is intergenerational sharing of knowledge where the young people train on the digital skills and the older generation train on storytelling, thus creating efficiency and effectiveness of the project. So after this, the people are trained, immediately they are supposed to create their own personal stories, which are screened. And during the screening, we have the local government being part of the process. And they get to respond to people's stories, they get to listen to the real experiences happening on the grassroots level. Again, and the most important thing is that the community gets chance to ask questions to the local government and to interact, share, and build relationship with the local government, which is not yet strong. Again, after screening during the process, we also take the stories to the community so that we can get more views, and also to see if the community resonates with the stories that are created by the leaders. So after the stories are screened in the community level, all the views from the stories from baseline survey, all the views are analyzed to create a prototype. So during the Future Yet project, one of the most challenging things that we found out was air pollution. There's a lot of air pollution in the area. The area is located next to a dumping site, so there's a lot of burning of waste, which pollutes the air. And again, the issue of food scarcity is also very rampant in the area. So during this particular project, we came up with a prototype, and the prototype is guided by the views and experiences from the community. So the prototype was a park, and the park had to contain those two aspects, the air pollution aspect and the food insecurity. So it had to have the two being incorporated. So we had fruit trees to show people how they can be able to increase the food in the area, fruit trees, and eventually the carbon, and eventually the kitchen garden. And then the trees also to act as the carbon sink in the area to solve the issue of air pollution, because air pollution causes climate change, and we were trying to solve that, and involve the the youth. During this, because the project is all about future, we try to involve youth, and youth and children take part in making of all these prototypes. So the park was actually set up in a school because we wanted to involve kids and for the kids to learn the practical skills of climate change, as well as youth, so that the youth can spread the park throughout and in different parts of the community. So after the whole process, we also were able to sit down and write down the climate change and adaptation manifesto of the community, which was handed over to the county government so that the government can incorporate the feeling of the people and experiences at the county government of Nairobi, which was not so hard because the relationship is already built during the project. So some of the challenges we have encountered include drought that make it very challenging to maintain those parks, and schools schedule are very tight due to COVID-19. So to give the kids practical skills is quite very challenging. The land ownership is also an issue because the youth, ideally the park is supposed to spread across the community, but the land, there's no land ownership. There's a lot of land ruggles between the people and the youth, so it becomes very hard to spread that the park throughout the community. All in all, we are continuing to share the knowledge and experiences and amplifying the voices of people for climate action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. One of the problems with Zoom webinars is that you can't get the round of applause from the audience, but I'm sure both of our speakers would have had a very, very loud round of applause because they're absolutely fascinating initiatives, and really appreciate you both taking the time to come and talk to us today, but also as the chair, for both sticking to time, which means we have a good amount of time for some discussion and to really dig into these. I've got a few questions that have been sent through, but please do also add further questions, and I will try and make sure I capture those that are being sent either in the meeting chat or over the email in advance. Maman, could you just turn your video back on again? Because then I think many of the questions I've got actually apply to both initiatives. And I wondered if I could just start with one question, which is actually my question, but I get to do that as the chair. I wondered if you could both talk about what it would take to accelerate the impact of your initiatives. So you've talked a lot about how you've been working with people and actually trying to capture these ideas and insights and real plans and then take them to government. But I wondered if you could both say, to take it to a next level, what would unlock that in terms of the impact? Perhaps first to Elizabeth and then to Maman. Did you get me, Elizabeth?
Yeah. Okay, one of how to unlock that would be to actually create more awareness so that the people can be able to drive some of these changes.
Yeah, and what do you mean by drive? Do you mean in terms of actually driving it in the community, or with government, or with national government, or what sort of, or all of those?
I mean that, yes, I mean that if we mobilize community, it will be so hard for the government not to be able to listen, or anybody who is opposing some of these changes, for them to not to do something. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Super, thanks very much, Elizabeth, really helpful. Maman, what about from your point of view, for your work in Bangladesh, how would you accelerate the impact if you could? What would it take?
From the very beginning, we are trying to engage the local authority. That means the municipality mayor, municipality councillor, and within our dialogue and within our data collection process, when we train the youth, then we invited them and why we are going through this. So they are involved from the very beginning, but when they are coming for the budget preparation and annual development plan of the towns and cities, so that times they are not willing for the all of the points which we identified through the data collection and from the mapping. So it is very difficult to engage and making the plan in the next level for the implementation. So and it's not easy to implement within a short term, but we are still working with them, and we are hoping that the patient group and youth groups are there. So day by day, some demands will be implemented.
Thanks very much. That actually relates to one of the questions from Indikana in the chat. Are there actually any formal avenues through which the community could take these issues and these insights up to the government? For example, participatory planning or budgeting. I wonder in both countries if you could say if that's an option, if that's part of the system.
Yeah, still, I agree. There is a formal review about the participatory budgeting and planning for the local governance, and this is very formal. But at practice level, this is not happening. So there is a formal manual for when they should consult with the slum dwellers. They should consult with the different group before planning their budget. But at the practice level, that is rarely happening in the country.
Thanks, Momin. What about in Kenya, Elizabeth? Is there a mechanism to involve for these initiatives to inform budget planning processes?
Yeah, there is, but I share the same light with Maimun, because yes, they are platform, but they are too formal for the people from the grassroots, or the information does not reach on the grassroots as it's supposed to be. So there's no participation and it is not happening.
So I think this is quite common. There's a sort of theoretical process, but in reality, the implementation is a bit less than the ambition. So I think that, which is a really interesting point to reflect on. I wondered if we could, there were a couple of other questions sent in advance. And I wondered if any of you thought and could talk to the question of how might the approach to planning for kind of urban futures for young people and in a changing climate be different in the global south compared to the global north? What are the sort of the key differences from where you sit when you look at examples that are from more high income countries? Do you want, Maman, would you like to start on that?
From our understanding, the people in North and the people in our communities, they are more vulnerable because they have less resilience and they don't have the capacity to tackle with the climate changes. So they are more vulnerable with the situation, and the government and public budget and public planning level, not only the participatory, but also they have less budget. So they are the more in difficult situation to implement these kind of needs and constant. So that is my experience. And another point I like to say that the children and young people, they are because they are in the position to do volunteering for the community, and they have the more access with the household level information. So they could be best vehicle to plan and to finding out the demands and in light of the climate change. So if we compare with the senior citizen, then I would say that young people, especially the girls, boys and children, they are the more effective to plan the climate resilience activities. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a really important point, and it strikes me that it's a very both of your approaches are really about starting with that community and understanding the community's assets and where the sort of the different sources of resilience are, but also where there are actual challenges that require external support, whether that's from government, national government or county government or a subnational government, or indeed international. And I think it's important that we recognize the insufficient progress really around mobilization of climate finance, and particularly finance for loss and damage. And certainly in the COP process, these kind of global things can feel very, they can feel almost a sort of sideshow in some ways, because they're on a different planet almost in these air-conditioned marquees in Egypt. But actually the important discussions there are and can connect down to much more community-based initiatives. But for that to happen, we need to see a real step change in the resources for loss and damages. And actually, one thing I would say to both of you is that I think your work to work with young people to understand the problems they experience, but also the solutions they see, can help inform those global conversations. And I think that's the sort of thing where we need to try and work through things like the Cities for Children Alliance, where we can actually say, well, can we bring partners together to elevate these stories and these experiences? Elizabeth, any thoughts from your side around, what do you try to learn from Global North, and what do you try to do differently from Global North in terms of which things can you borrow and which things do you adapt? And I think there's another conversation the other way as well, I should say. I think that there's an awful lot that we can learn from initiatives in lower and middle income countries or high income countries as well.
Yeah, I think the youth have a higher burden in Global South because of lack of resources or insufficient resources. So, and the government or the people who are in charge are not willing to increase resources to the young people and children. I think that's what I would recommend, or I would borrow from the Global North, where the young people and children are taken seriously. I think that's one thing that would be very important if the youth resources are increased.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think that relates very nicely to one of the other questions that was submitted. There's one of the somebody in advance had asked what would encompass a policy framework for family-friendly cities? How would we create such a thing? And perhaps you could talk a little bit about your experience of what would that look like from your point of view. Please go ahead, Maman.
Robert, can I add something, Robert, with the question of the learning from the North? One of the
please do.
From our experience, we found that there are lots of activities and planning is going on from the public and private sector. Both of the sectors are trying to address the climate changes, induce changes, and the other activities. So, but one of the learning should be improved, and the capacity of coordination and capacity of communication with all of the stakeholders that need to improve. And I think that capacity should be transferred from the Global North to Global South, because still there is a very silo activities, there is a isolation, there is a avoid from this others. So different ministries, different departments, they are implementing their different activities, but the less coordination. So if we can coordinate every plan and every activities, then it is possible to address climate change within the short budget and within the short plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maman. That's really helpful. I'm conscious we're running low on time, but I do want to, if people have one last question, please put it in the chat. But I also wanted to ask Elizabeth, And Mamun, just for a final question from my side, we may get one more. Where can both of our where can our people watching this learn more about your initiatives? And if they want to, particularly if they want to try to replicate or contribute to supporting them, maybe you could talk about that. Elizabeth, how can people find out more?
Okay, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook. We have social media at For Praises Initiative, and through our website at www.forpraises.com.
Super. Thanks, Elizabeth. And Mamun, what about if people want to learn more about your work? I'll put those in the chat as well.
Mamun, you need to unmute.
You're on mute, Mamun.
Definitely, I would request and invite all of you to visit our website, and at the same time, so already I mentioned that this the coordination and communication capacity building should be improved with the global north local level organization who are working at the community level, and the climate change budget and climate change planning should be localized and should be bottom up and with consultation with the communities, and so that the affected community could be better supported with the limited budget. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I just wanted to sort of make actually draw on one of the comments in the chat, which I think is a really important point, which is that I think and thank you, Karine, for making this point, that she's saying, don't you think that global South countries are somehow adopting low-cost production solutions compared to North countries and relying on traditional know-how? And I think it's a complicated, and I guess I think what I'm saying is, you know, does this put South countries in a more privileged situation to see what pertains to climate change and its impact? And it's a really interesting thing, because I think it's sometimes I think we need to both understand the equity and inequity and the justified calls for greater climate justice, but we also need to try and within that recognize all of the diversity of experience and insights that can come from within communities as well as from outside. And it's almost a fine line where we need to say, look, we need the external resources, but we actually also need those resources to be spent and spent in a way that doesn't undermine those local sources of resilience and creativity. I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to I want to just thank both of our speakers and all of our panelists for really, really fascinating fascinating work, but also for taking the time today to share it with us. So with that, I would do another virtual round of applause for all of our participants. I can see lots of thanks in the chat, and hand it back to Stephanie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Stephanie, if there's nothing else to add from your side, I'll use the time for some closing remarks and our survey.
Yes, from my side, I just want to thank you, everyone, and thank you, Robert, for moderating, and thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mamun, for sharing your great insights and your wonderful initiatives.
Yeah. So thank you to all the participants who joined us today and found time to hear us out and also, share their wonderful questions and insights. Thank you, Robert, for being such an active and involved moderator and the wonderful work you do, irrespective of this webinar or not. Thank you, Mamun, for joining in. I know it's festival time in Bangladesh, but you still made time, and we are grateful for that. Elizabeth, I think you're leading from the front. You're being a youth member of the community yourself. You're leading from the front, and that's very, very inspiring. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your wonderful work with all of us today and coming together for this webinar and also sharing what you do with the rest of the world. With that, I would close the webinar. Just one very short request for all the participants. When you leave the webinar, there'll be a survey popping up on your screen. It's going to take less than a minute. We are requesting you to please fill that in, because it will help us to make sure we are able to improve on the content and the kind of webinars we are going to put together for you, and also maybe help us to share more updates with you whenever we are putting together any knowledge resources or events like these. So looking forward to seeing all of you for the next webinar. Keep an eye on our website and on our social media, so you are staying tuned to what's coming up next. With that, we can formally close the day. Have a really good week, all of you.